In September of 2012, publisher Electronic Arts officially announced Dragon Age Inquisition, with the planned release date being late 2013. However, a couple of years and 2 delays later, it finally released in November of 2014. The game was received generally well, and it even won Game of the Year in 2014. Inquisition's development was not without difficulties, however. In fact, the switch to the Frostbite engine proved to be especially difficult, and caused the developers a lot of headaches, I'm sure. And like with any other game, there was some content that just didn't make the final cut. Not too long ago, I talked about the things that did not make it into Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2. Now it's Inquisition's turn. So grab yourself a nice cup of tea and let me tell you all about the content that was cut from Dragon Age Inquisition. Inquisition's development began in 2011. And with its open world structure and the goal of creating 20 to 200 hours of content, it would be BioWare's biggest single player game at the time of its release. On top of that, the game was to have a multiplayer component. However, BioWare's Eclipse engine, the engine that was used for the previous 2 games, had started to show its age. Its graphical renderer wasn't as strong as it needed to be, and the engine wasn't made for open worlds and multiplayer. While looking for a successor, BioWare's executives became fascinated by the Frostbite engine, which was created by DICE, one of EA's other studios, and probably most famous for the Battlefield games. In order to get a feel for what it would be like to work with the engine, Mark Dara, executive producer at the time, gathered a small team to work on a project called Blackfoot. Blackfoot's production started right before the release of Dragon Age 2, and it was to be a multiplayer-only Dragon Age game. Though its scope proved to be too much for the small team that was working on it, and it got cancelled a few months later. Working with and getting used to the Frostbite engine caused the developers a lot of headaches. Frostbite engine was not made for RPGs. It lacked the tools to create the things necessary for an RPG like Dragon Age, such as a dialogue wheel, cutscenes, and the ability to save your game. BioWare now had to create all these tools themselves. What made things worse is that DICE began updating the Frostbite engine with new features on its own, while BioWare was still trying to create their tools for the engine. Which meant that they now had to update the engine and integrate their tools at the same time, which caused the engine to be unstable or sometimes just not even work at all. While all of this was going on, BioWare was still working on the Exalted March DLC, which was to be an Awakening-sized expansion for Dragon Age 2. With all of the trouble that Frostbite was causing for the developers, Mark Dara made the decision to cancel the Exalted March, so that the team could fully focus on Inquisition's development while learning how to work with the engine. I won't go into further detail about the expansion here, but if you want to know more, I did make a video on the content that was cut from Dragon Age 2, where I fully talk about this, so make sure to check out that video if you haven't yet. On top of all the things I just mentioned, EA wanted BioWare to release the game on older consoles as well as newer ones, which meant that many features that worked on more advanced platforms had to be removed, as Mike Laidlaw and Mark Dara wanted the game to be consistent across all 5 platforms. With all of the technical challenges, Inquisition's development fell behind on schedule, and eventually Mark Dara asked EA to delay the game into 2014, so that they would have more time to make up for the difficulties Frostbite had caused, and to be able to add more features into the game like extra romance options and different playable races, which I will talk more about in a little bit. In the later stages of development, BioWare and DICE managed to cooperate better, which made things easier and resulted in faster progress. Despite that though, there was still a lot of pressure on the team, and they resorted to crunching extensively in late 2014 to make sure the game would be ready. And finally, after 2 delays, the game released in November of 2014. About a year prior to Inquisition's release, BioWare showed off a demo at PAX PRIME 2013. The demo showed off the area of Crestwood. However, the area looked way different than what we currently have in-game. In the demo, Red Templars are attacking Crestwood Village and one of your keeps in the area, injuring some of the Inquisition soldiers in the process. The Inquisitor then gets to choose where to send the rest of their soldiers. Either have them stay with their wounded and help as many of them as possible, go to Crestwood and help defend the village, or have them go and defend your keep. Each option would have had different consequences. The choice of sending your soldiers to defend the keep would result into the village being destroyed and its people being killed, which is what was shown in the demo. On the way to the keep, it is shown that we were actually gonna have the ability to set enemy boats on fire using Antivan Fire, which is a grenade. But it would have also been possible to do so as a mage with a spell like Fireball. Another thing that the demo showed off was the ability to customize the keeps you had captured, upgrading them by using Inquisition agents and giving you the option of making your keep more military focused, more merchant focused, or more focused on espionage and secret gathering. The reason that these things didn't make it into the final game was most likely due to the technical limitations, and the demo was a pre-alpha build, so it's not a big surprise that it looked way different from what we have, especially knowing the many struggles BioWare had during Inquisition's development. As I mentioned in my video about cut content for Dragon Age 2, a lot of plot points from the Exalted March DLC ended up being in Inquisition, like Corypheus and the Red Templars. The initial story for Dragon Age Inquisition was much longer because they had combined the original story for Inquisition with the story of the Exalted March, but it ended up being too long. So they cut it in half, making it shorter while still maintaining the arc that they had always intended and still establishing the pace of lore reveals for the world that they wanted. While a lot of content gets cut due to lack of time or technical limitations, etc., keep in mind that a lot of things get cut or changed because they just don't work. Whether that's from a narrative standpoint or from a gameplay standpoint or whatever, these changes are often made for a good reason. And while it's cool to imagine what might have been, these kinds of changes are often for the better. Both Wicked Eyes and Wicked Hearts and Here Lies the Abyss quests went through a lot of different phases. While the overall plot generally stayed the same, they changed a lot in terms of their presentation. One of the versions of Here Lies the Abyss actually didn't involve the Fate at all. You'd still go to Adamant and end up falling into the Abyss, but you'd end up in the Deep Roads instead. While trying to find your way out, you would run into the Architect, the intelligent Darkspawn from Awakening. In early development, there was a version of Cole's personal quest where the Inquisitor had 3 choices instead of 2. Either side with Varric and make Cole more human, side with Solus and make Cole more spirit, or allow Cole to kill the Templar. Apparently the scene for the third option was pretty brutal, as Cole would get really stabby, more than was necessary for the actual kill. The reason this was cut was because of the budget. 2 options would work really well with the budget that they had. 3 options, however, kind of. So it was changed. And it was also for the better when it came to Cole's story. Patrick Weeks actually wasn't a fan of the third option to begin with, so they were admittedly happy when it got cut. Sticking to the topic of Cole, originally if the Inquisitor did not do Cole's personal quest and took him to the final battle with Corypheus, Cory would have taken control of Cole, turning him against our Inquisitor. However, this proved to be difficult to balance for the combat designers, as the Inquisitor would then have to fight Corypheus with a party of 3 rather than 4. And doing this would also mean pouring a lot of resources into a scenario for players that did not take the time to get to know Cole or care much for him. Because, you know, they skipped his personal quest. So this whole thing was changed, and instead, the game now rewards players that give Cole the attention that he very much deserves. The Iron Bull's original design had him be one-handed instead of one-eyed. He'd be missing his left hand, and in battle, he'd be using prosthetics, one of which would be a cannon. Unfortunately, this was too difficult to implement in the game engine, and it wouldn't be worth it to create a unique fighting style just for one character. Would have been badass though. And hey look, BioWare, if you ever want to pick up this concept again, I think we all know a certain someone who happens to be missing their left arm and would be very happy to use a prosthetic crossbow in combat. Our Inquisitor. Sorry about that, I'm having a weird cough today. At some point during development, it was going to be possible for our Inquisitor to become divine if we had gathered enough power. Of course, it would have been twice as difficult for a male Inquisitor, and even more so for a Qunari Inquisitor. Apparently, this idea made for some interesting and heated discussions internally. Of course, this was completely against the lore, so it was scrapped. One piece of concept art that was made between Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition depicts Anders and the shadow of another person, likely being the Inquisitors. Anders doesn't seem to be in a very good state, and it looks like he's been hiding and living in a cave. Obviously, none of this made it into the game, but the piece of concept art probably means that the devs played around with the idea of our Inquisitor running into Anders if Hawk didn't kill him at the end of Dragon Age 2. Apart from his attack on Haven, Corypheus was supposed to attack Skyhold as well, which would have made him feel much more threatening, to be honest. After Haven, it seems like we're always just one step ahead of him. I imagine, just as things were going really well for us, his attack would have taken us by surprise and made us realize that despite having a big army and a castle, we are not invincible and we need to constantly be watching our back. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much more information on this, other than David Gator mentioning it on his streams where he played Dragon Age Origins and talked about the games. And I've seen people mention here and there that it was also talked about in an interview at some point, but I couldn't find anything else, so if anyone happens to have more information on this, please let me know, because I would love to know more about this. As I mentioned earlier, EA gave BioWare an extra year of development, which gave them room to add some extra features into the game. One of these being multiple playable races, which did turn out to be a bit of a challenge for the writers to write all of them into the story. Originally, we would only be able to play humans, and instead we would have been able to choose from different character backgrounds. I couldn't find much more information about the backgrounds themselves, though. Apart from the multiple playable races, the extra time also allowed BioWare to add 2 extra romance options, Cullen and Solus, with Cullen being an option for female elves and humans, and Solus being an option for female elves. Speaking of Solus, there was going to be a playable epilogue quest where you'd search for him. As the team was working on this idea, they went through different versions and ended up going with the cutscene that we get at the end. The reason for that is that they didn't want to reveal too much yet, but they wanted to give the player something that was just enough to make them wonder and speculate. Another reason is that they felt like if they had made a complete quest out of it, there would have been too many issues with it and it wouldn't have been to the quality that they thought it deserved. Also, apparently there were versions of the cutscene where your Inquisitor was present when Solus was meeting up with Mythal. And that's it for the content that was cut from Dragon Age Inquisition. And now that I've covered all 3 games, that's it for the series, I guess? I mean for now, because I will definitely cover Dragon Age 4, or Dragon Age Dreadwolf I should say. Man, that still feels weird to say. And I mean, it's probably going to be years before we'll even know what the cut content is, because obviously the game hasn't even released yet. At least not at the time of recording this video, but man, if I include Dragon Age Dreadwolf's development, it's going to be a long video because holy shit, there's a lot to talk about. You know what? It might even be worth it to just make a whole video on just Dreadwolf's development once the game releases, hopefully next year? But anyway, that is something for future Lisa to figure out. So for now, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, let me know by liking this video, or leave a comment and let me know which piece of cut content you would have liked to see in the game. That's all for now though. Thanks again for watching and I hope to see you on the next one.